Well, welcome to another of our series of our stories of Cannon Falls residents. We're here today with Ole Hallenger, who's former Chief of Police of Cannon Falls, amongst other things. In advance, of course, I'd like to thank my crew of Mike Gesme and Dick Mensing for making this all possible. And Ole, welcome. Glad to have you here. And I think, as always, it makes sense to kind of start in the beginning. So why don't you tell us about your early years a bit?
Okay, I was born in Sogan area to a family of 10, a small farm. I think back at it now, we were poor people and didn't know it. I think all of our neighbors were kind of in the same boat. I went to Kenyon High School. We were right on the edge of between Cannon Falls, Kenyon. Went to Kenyon High School, graduated, believe it or not, from school. First one in our family that was able to attend high school.
Really? Yeah.
None of the other family had that opportunity. I ended up going into service, coming out of the service, went to work for Lampert Yards, which is what's across from the winery now.
Yes.
Worked there for about 3.5 years. And one day when I was working there, Ed I. Miller, I believe, was the mayor at the time. And he come down and he said, I'd like to have you put in an application for a police department. Well, I guess I never really gave it a thought that I'd end up being a policeman. And after about a week, he come back and I haven't got that application yet. I said, okay, so I decided to do it. Went to work nights. I got a gun and a badge and the keys for the car, and now today I'm going to arrest people for things I was doing yesterday. Rather at that particular time there was very little or no schooling. We had to complete the 40 hours within the first 6 months, which was up at Enver Hills at that particular time. And when you're traveling around Cannon Falls, you'll notice that up on the Masonic building, there's a light bulb. That was our call system. During the liquor store hours, the liquor store took the calls, and Jerry Granis, who lived in the, where Dave's TV is now, he took calls off hours. So if you needed the police at 2 o'clock in the morning, you called this number, Jerry Granis answered it, he snapped on the light. So we had to regularly hit Main Street and so that we could find out if we had a call, go to the city hall, make a phone call to him, find out what's going on. It was the best we had. It took a number of years before we finally we put a radio in the hospital. And so the gals could dispatch for us, the calls came in there. And at that particular time, it worked out well because we had gotten in 61. No, I went to work for the city in 61. 69, we got the ambulance. Clint Lundberg had been doing it. City father said, you will take the ambulance. Well, there were 2 of us and no way to communicate, if you got a call, by the time they turned on the light, we ran to City Hall, you called somebody and hoped they went with it. In those days, we were kind of scoop and run. We had a hearse that we inherited from Clint, and that's what we traveled with. Now, a hearse is not made to go 80 miles an hour to Rochester. No. We had tire problems. Those tires would get hot and we'd blow a cap. And if you blew one of them going to Rochester, that dust that had gathered all those through years, that rubber slapping up under the fender, it would get to the point where you couldn't hardly see in there for dust. No air conditioning. It was a challenge. There's no doubt. I don't think I'll ever forget probably our first ambulance run. We got a call that there was a car in the overpass out on 56 in the Stanton area. So off we go. And of course, we had no spotlight. You had a flashlight. You're out there and 2 o'clock in the morning trying to find a car in a ditch someplace. We finally did find it. We had a walking wounded. We had 2 other ones that needed attention. We loaded them up. We head for the hospital, and I thought, wow, we're here. Well, that's all great, but the 2 doctors, Williams and Molnar, said, this one goes to Rochester.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Nice, 2 o'clock in the morning at about 90 degrees with no air conditioning.
my.
It was a fun ride.
Yeah.
But we managed, we ended up being the 100th funded ambulance under the Highway Traffic Act, I believe it was. So we got a new van that would haul 4 people. Well, 4 people is fine. 1 person is not going to take care of 4 people, and there wasn't room in there for 5. But prior to that, with the hearse, we're going to picked up Dick Houghton. Him and I are going to 9 and 56 to an ambulance accident. So we knew we were going to, we already had a patient and probably 2 more. So we go scooting over there, and in front of the West Winds Cafe, the young fellow decided he's going to make a left turn in front of us. Well, that big old hearse changed his mind.
Yeah.
But we ended up laying on the side in the ditch in front of there. And if you can imagine, you know Dick Houghton, if you can imagine him on top of me, I'm on the bottom side. That took care of our ambulance.
Yes,
and really it was good, because it was not the type of thing that you should have been running around doing any speeding with.
But talk about the ambulance that Clint Lundberg ran. Did it have any medical equipment in it at all?
No, well, we had no oxygen. Our suction was one of these infant balls that you take the mucus out of a baby.
Yeah.
That's what we had. And we really had we had advanced first aid, and then I was able to go and get my EMT license, and then we only had 2 police officers at the time, and I talked the city into hiring the 3rd one, and I hired a young fellow who was working for Gold Cross Ambulance in Rochester, and he really helped us out because he'd been working for them for 3-4 years, and so that really helped to have him on board.
I wanted to ask you about those early years when you started. You said you had 2 officers. How did you cover the time in Cannon Falls?
Well, you had a choice. You could work a 12-hour night or a 12-hour day. It was as simple as that. When I look back at it now, if you weren't working, you were on call. You had no backup. Our radio, we didn't have a radio. We finally got some pagers where they could page us, but the sheriff's office at that time, at 2 o'clock, there was no more radio anymore. And Cannon Falls is a real bad area for radio because we sat down in the hole, and it's hard to get out here. Now, I could sit at home and watch them on the moon talking to the earth, and I couldn't get the red ring. I said, there's something the matter with this picture.
No.
But I'm glad I'd done it. I don't know if I'd care to do it all over again. Law enforcement if you're going into law enforcement for rewards, there are very few. There's a lot of heartbreak. We used to have a parking stall downtown. The squad car was there. Of course, when we weren't roaming around. And you spend as much time as I did on the street, nights and days. I got to the point where I could, for a block and a half away, I could tell who it was by his walk. You
Yeah.
just spent that much time around there.
So would you have coverage 24/7 on the weekends and all then?
We had a couple of part-times that would fill in
Okay.
for like maybe a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday, and things were relatively quiet. I guess we fit what was needed at the time. We didn't have what they have today, and I guess it's a whole different world.
Yeah, but there were certainly times even then where you needed a second person or a
Yeah,
backup in an
yeah.
accident or
And you didn't stick your nose into something you couldn't back out of because you were it.
yeah.
I mean, the backup was, by the time backup got there, the whole thing is over with. You know, I spent a lot of time Main Street. I checked, and that was part of the job. I checked just about every door most every night, and it was something to do. And I remember one night I turned the corner going in behind Eltoff's, that area in there, and it sounded like I ran over something, kind of a metallic sound. So I backed up and I looked. I didn't see anything, but I pulled into the alley, and here's a well-dressed young man sitting on Eltoff's back step. And I thought, little unusual, you know. So of course, I'm alone. And I figured I was probably too soon for a burglary. And so I got all the information I could get and whatever and whatnot, and it was after 2 in the morning, and of course I had nobody else I could contact. So I let him go. And he was driving a Cadillac, very, well-dressed young man driving almost a new Cadillac. And after I'd let him go, I'm checking doors in that particular area before I let him go. But I let him go, and I get to Schofield's, the door's broken.
Oh,
I had a burglary.
sure.
But I had checked him out as far as body-wise, guns, anything like that, and he was clean. Well, he said he'd been in Rochester and he'd gotten so tired that he thought he'd take a walk. There's this nice little town. But he had the car parked back of like Lampert's. I thought, well, why do you park your Cadillac back of Lampert's if you're going for a little walk? So, he said he needed a cup of coffee, and I said, well, you drove right by the Cannonball, it's open. And I knew I had something, but I didn't know what. So we let him go, and after I found Schofield broke into, here he drives through the intersection going north. So I ran him down, and of course we took him off to jail, and the metallic noise that I'd heard is when my lights hit that alley, he threw the crowbar and a handful of change on top of Eltoff's roof, or Gamble roof, which is pitch and gravel, and that's the noise I heard.
Oh, sure.
And I got thinking about that. So the next day I get me a ladder and up I go, and sure enough, and we, and talking to Chuck Schofield, they put enough money in the till so that if somebody needed a prescription, they could make change for a $20 bill or whatever. Now that's about exactly the amount of change that he had. Also, he had, his money was all right, all folded right, and whatever. The dollar bills and whatever from the till was just stuffed in his pocket. I mean, we ended up convicting him, but it was, a lot of those cases could be very interesting. We had a numerous bunch of burglaries at one time, home burglaries. I suppose close to a dozen of them in Dakota County, Cannon Falls, and south. And usually when you had something like that going on, you had a stranger in town, or you had a new family moved in, or something or other. And there was a couple that had moved in north of Cannon Falls in Dakota County. And so I got thinking, you know, they weren't working any place. So I started spending some time looking at them or watching them or whatever and whatnot. I ended up going up to St. Paul to the pawn shops and found some of the stuff that had been stolen, coins, watches, such as that, and spent some time keeping track of them people until I could get enough information so that we got a search warrant. And we went out there with pickups and hauled stuff out of there, rented a place out there. Lucky enough to clear that one up anyway.
Tell us in those days when you'd find someone like this fella at Eltoff's and have to arrest him in the middle of the night, where would you take him? Was there a jail in town?
We had, there was two cells in where the liquor store, Rod's liquor store is now.
Okay.
In fact, that was our office, I guess.
Yeah, well,
And
okay.
there was two cells there. We used to occasionally had knights of the road that would come by and ask to stay, and at that time we let them stay there. Then somebody got in trouble in Northfield on a fire in a mattress or something or other, and so that all ended. And we used to have a guy that came through. You could set the calendar by him. He was either heading south or heading north, and he'd have a satchel, and he'd come in and ask if he could stay in the jail, and then he'd wash his clothes and whatever and whatnot.
Really?
And when he left in the morning, the place was spotless.
Wow.
He'd wash the floors and
Would there actually be someone on duty there if you had someone in the
No,
cell?
no, we didn't.
No.
And I guess, you know, I suppose it could have got in trouble for it, but it was, people weren't quite so worried about lawsuits and that at that time until it started happening, and then of course that did.
When you started out, you were I'm assuming the second one on the force. Who was the chief at that time?
Bud Strack
Bud
was there when he was the chief when I went to work. And then a year later, Bud Strack left and went to work at Coke Refining. And they talked me into staying on as chief. And 24 years later, I was still there.
Yeah, okay, that's all that.
When I left the city, I went to work for Coke Refining on the safety department, emergency medical and firefighter and security up there. So, and I was with them for 11 years before I quit. And I think I started for them in '85, I believe.
Okay.
That was an interesting job too.
When you were on the police force here, were you on the fire department?
Yeah,
as
I
well?
was. I think I got 26 years on the fire department. When I went to work for Coke, I got out of the Cannon Falls because I was out of town so much that I moved over and let somebody local come onto the department.
Yeah. There had to be times when you were that few staff compared to today, where you were on an ambulance run or a fire call or whatever, where there was no police coverage. I mean, because you were out doing something else. What would happen? And something must have happened once in a while in those cases where no one was around.
We were very lucky, and I think maybe the public realized that we were not available, or the respect, or I don't know, but. You know, we left the squad car. We hoped we found somebody to go with us on an ambulance run, and brought him back, got back in the squad car, went back to work, you know.
Yeah.
Some of the nasty things you get into, and I'm sure they still do with the ambulance.
If you would go on an ambulance call, you say you get someone to go with you, would they be the driver, or would you be the driver, or who would actually attend to a patient?
Usually they were the driver.
Okay.
Because I was somewhat trained, and we had some people that done some super jobs, you know, Ron Freeberg and Brenda Vishalik and Jim Germstead, and these people spent a lot of time training and working with us, and there was numerous other ones too through the years. And really, you know, the people of Cannon Falls have been very lucky to have the volunteers
Absolutely.
that have come forward and do their thing, you know.
Yeah.
Leave the Christmas table at time to sit down to eat when the siren goes off. You
Yeah.
know?
Did you ever in those early days wish you had some more piece of equipment in this ambulance?
Oh,
or-
yes,
yeah.
so many
Yeah,
times.
I'm sure.
Once we got the funded ambulance, then we were equipped pretty well.
Yeah.
Although that ambulance isn't nearly got the equipment that the newer ones do.
Right.
We made, like I say, that was scoop and run days. You know, pick them up and hope. And then the Rochester run. You know, weather has a tendency to create accidents. So who's out on the road making a run to Rochester? You know, it was 45 miles of ice or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go. And the doctor would tell you, he said, now, don't waste any time with this one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. As if you were going to waste time no matter what. Huh?
Yeah.
I know Dick Mensing said that he had to do a story before your time, talk to the police chief, and one of his questions when he was in school was to ask the chief what was his most embarrassing thing he'd ever come across in the police work. He had quite a story. I don't know if you'd have quite that good a one or not, but
Well, I guess there are lots of things that happened through the years, but right now some of them have escaped me.
yeah. Maybe we should ask it the other way. What was kind of the most rewarding or the kind of the highlight experience?
I think probably one of the highlights was we got a call on a drowning in the Cannon River and on the dump road.
Mm-hmm.
And I went down the dump road knowing that there was places I could get to the river, to see the river anyway, and stopped at one of those places and could see a brightly colored swimsuit or something floating down the river. When another guy and I waded out there, got the girl, and started CPR and that on the way wading back in. I would have bet at the time that we weren't going to do any good, but she responded, went to Rochester by ambulance. That woman is out and around today.
Really, yeah.
And I got the Distinguished Service Award for saving a life. And there aren't many people that get a chance to do that.
No, that's pretty great.
Or need to do that. But there were some rewards, yes.
Sure, yeah.
Yes. A lot of rewards came from young people who you kind of kicked their butt once in a while. You had to. You were their parent because the parents didn't care where they were at. And they'd go off to the service or college or whatever and come back and look you up and say, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, for what? And you learned that some of these supposedly little problem makers kind of followed you around, and they were there. Because even if you kicked their butt or give them heck, you were somebody that cared.
Yes.
And they didn't get that at home, or it sure didn't seem like they did. And so those were rewards. You know, even yet today, some of them say, hey, never forget you on the street. Well, I don't know, maybe I've done some good, I hope so.
Do you remember any of those that you thought were troublemakers that ended up in law enforcement later in life? Because I'm sure that does happen.
Oh, I'm sure I probably was one of them.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think too many people in Kenyon would believe I'd have been a policeman. My classmates, anyway.
Okay. I'm intrigued when you started out saying you were from a family of 10 and you were the first one to go to high school. Where in the lineup of 10 kids did you fall?
I have two younger sisters,
Okay,
so I would have been 8.
okay,
I was, from about 12 years on, I pretty much was out of the home. I worked for farmers and whatever and whatnot, so it's pretty much out on my own.
okay.
I had a sister and husband who worked for different farms, and some of the time I would be working there, getting, what, $30, no, a couple dollars a month, I suppose, in food.
Most of those were little dairy farms probably in those days.
Yeah, dairy farms. And
is that what you grew up on? Your family had a
yeah,
dairy
it was a
farm, or-
dairy farm.
Yeah.
Well, we had chickens and pigs and
Yeah,
cows, and 85 acres, mother's home place.
yeah. I think of how much that's changed around here.
Oh.
Even when I went to school in Cannon Falls, half the kids were farm kids, and that meant they were dairy farm kids, and I was the only one that was a turkey farm kid. But now you're hard pressed to find someone who's actually from a farm in school anymore.
I think we really lost something when we lost these 240-acre farms and whatever. It was a good life. You probably didn't have a lot of nickels in your pocket, but you didn't go hungry.
Yeah,
And the family was there.
right.
You know, we didn't have electricity until well after I graduated from high school.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a lantern or a lamp by the big table. That's where most of the evenings were spent. The whole family was there,
Yes.
you know, and you lost that. Now they're in the back corner someplace in a Rambler, and they don't see one another maybe once a day.
No, that's changed.
Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking that changed during your years of policing was the drugs came on the scene. How did that affect what?
The drugs, they were there, but not as much as there is today. You know, there was a little marijuana around, but we didn't get much of the hard stuff, I don't think, or at least we didn't run into that much of it. The thing of choice then was basically beer.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
beer parties. I don't know if there are a lot of beer parties now. They used to be regular.
Yeah. No, I would guess there probably still are, but
Yeah.
no. And I'm sure you came. I may have been at one or two of those where you came in the middle of the night and found where they were.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we used. But they were fun days. Enjoyed them. I wish I'd have liked to have another policeman along the way, you know, to relieve some of the hours and whatever. But we made do.
You started with 2, and when you left the force, how many were there by that time, Ole?
There was 3 of us.
3 by then. Okay.
Yeah. And then we had a couple of part-time that filled in. But
Uh-huh.
It was 3 of us. See, we were kind of a training ground for the larger departments. We'd get these young. I like to take, at that time, they didn't have the law enforcement schools.
Mm.
So I would try to take a young person and make that person fit our needs, and it worked out real well. Now they come with their degree, which is fine. But as I went recruiting people, I found numerous people who were constantly there, You constantly got there. But, and you hoped when looking at it that they didn't end up being in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
But we trained people for other departments. Red
Yeah.
Wing, Goodyear County,
Yeah.
they'd stay with, get their feet on the ground, and they paid more money. Working conditions were better, so off they went. We'd have to find another one.
Yeah. Were they local people that you would start out?
Most of them were all, they were all local
Yeah.
people.
And I think that whole idea has changed a little bit, that, you know, when we grew up, you kind of knew who the police were because they're part of your community, and now
Right.
that's not as much true
No,
because they're
no.
professional. But
I think it's law enforcement today is more behind glass. You know, they spend a lot of time in a vehicle cruising and whatever, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but it works.
Sure. Did you work with the county sheriff, law enforcement a lot
Yeah,
in those days?
yeah. Yeah, and in the highway patrol, we had 4 highway patrolmen that worked out of Rochester, and of course we got the Twin City ones too, because
You're in between, yeah.
so
Yeah.
we had we used to have a key for little Oscar, or for Oscars, the downtown.
Yeah.
We had a key for there, and so somebody'd show up 2 o'clock in the morning. We'd get the coffee pot going and have to have a cup of coffee. But Oscar would say, if you guys don't show up, he said, I'm going to have to buy insurance.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few Oscar stories you could tell, probably. He was quite a guy.
Yeah, Oscar stories.
Yeah.
I come down there, I suppose it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and stop down there, and the lights are on, the door's open, the till is standing there, and I'm thinking, Oscar's around here someplace. Well, finally I gave up looking around there, and I drive up to his house, and the car and everything is there, and so I go back and I lock the place up. About 6 o'clock in the morning, I get a phone call from Oscar, and he's giving me heck because I locked the place up. Well, it was April Fool.
Oh.
So Oscar, he don't want to get up and go down, and so he just leaves it the night before, and he wants all these people to walk in and sit down looking for Oscar, and he's not there. That was Oscar.
Yeah, that's a different era too, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, this has really been fun. Do you have anything else in your notes you want to?
I don't know. I've been rambling on. Maybe some of it don't make any sense, but some of the ambulance stuff that we went on, and they still do it. You functioned at the time. They probably give you a bad time afterwards when you finally, especially if you were dealing with children and you had them at home at that age.
Yeah.
Like the drownings and whatever.
Yeah.
But you learn to function, and you done your thing at the time, and
It had to be some of those nights where it's tough to sleep after some of those, I'm sure too.
Yeah,
But
yeah. And it was hard to leave it at work and not bring it home.
yeah. Yeah, especially when you're working 12-hour shifts, there's not much time before you go back again. So.
No. I remember one time Kenny Johnson was policeman here before he went to Red Wing, and went down to Little Oscar's. I think the wife and I went for a walk. So we get down there, and here's Kenny. I said, something the matter with this picture. One of us is supposed to be working. And I don't remember who went to work, but one of us did.
Well, it's a lot of fun to hear some of those stories, and fun for me and Dick, probably, who grew up here, to hear some of those.
Yeah.
But, those were good times for sure.
They were good times. Good times.